Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us for pricing at tmosso@the1916company.com for pricing. Today, we discuss part of the 70th anniversary Breitling Navitimer collection launched in 2022. This is the Breitling Navitimer 70th anniversary Chronograph 43, so it's the B01 Chronograph 43, which tells you it's got Breitling's in-house caliber. It is 43 millimeters in diameter and was part of a vintage inflected collection with various dial color patterns launched in 2022. Now, some people say that the Navitimer was launched in the mid-50s, not in 1952. Well, we're not going to litigate that dispute here. We're going to take Breitling at its word, and we're going to discuss what makes this watch appealing. So, as I mentioned, in stainless steel, 43 millimeters in diameter. The classic flight calculator chronograph here is 13.8 millimeters thick, and from lug tip to lug tip, 48.9 millimeters. If we include the end links of the bracelet, the total distance across the wrist is 50 millimeters with a broad 22 millimeter spacing between the lugs. On my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, you can see the watch wears well. The short lug-to-lug dimension, at least for a 43 millimeter Navitimer, means this watch is suitable on a wrist as small as 15 centimeters circumference. And I say that because the end link of the bracelet does reach out to 50 millimeters. So again, a little bit smaller than my wrist. 15 centimeters circumference wrists will be able to wear this well. You can see down the barrel, I've still got plenty of clearance on each side of the lugs. You might even try a 14 centimeter circumference wrist if your wrist is more flat than round. Over the top, cuff shot. Now let's take a look at this Navitimer bracelet. So you can see it is different than the Pilot bracelet. The Pilot bracelet is 5-link. The Navitimer bracelet is 7-link. That's how you can tell the difference. There's a little end link that mates it to the case, so closing the gap for a very integrated look. You could see that we've got a little bit of tapering down from the end link. We have alternately polished and satinated links. The outer faces are satinated. You can see there are gaps between the links to allow the skin to ventilate well and breathe on a hot day. Removable links here are fixed by screws, and you can see we have quite a few of them. You can also see that there's an intermediate sized link right there if you're in between sizes and you need to fine tune the fit. Now, Breitling clasps have been getting better and better, and you can see that is definitely the case right here. More robust than in the past. It's no longer stamped. It's no longer a thin shell of steel. Instead, we have a proper double folding mechanism with a trigger release rather than a stamped clamshell. So it is a sequential close. One side closes before the other, and the newer clasps are also thinner than the old stamped clasps. So lots to love here. The trigger release and the internal detailing makes it look and feel like a more expensive product. Taking a look at the case, it is very familiar. A narrow case band, squared off, lightly beveled lugs, polished on their tops, satinated on their sides. We have vintage pump-style pushers, the Breitling B on the crown. We have a bezel that has polished and media blasted knurling, with the outer faces polished and the recesses media blasted. We also have what may look like a plexiglass, but is actually a bubble cambered sapphire. So it's scratch resistant like a sapphire. And if you turn it off axis, it does have a little bit of the distortion effect of a plexi like you would have found on a 1952 Navitimer. Quick note about those wings. The AOPA, the Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association of the United States, actually sold the Navitimer through its catalog to its members. There's some dispute over whether Breitling customized the watch with AOPA wings for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, or whether the watch was itself designed by the AOPA and built by Breitling in a sort of contract fabrication scheme, which would make the watch much more AOPA's than Breitling. Well, Breitling insists that it was not instructed on how to make the watch or how to design the watch, and that it merely provided the service to AOPA. But in the earliest days, those wings with the badge, or I should say the shield, would have said AOPA across the center of the shield. Today, it's the exact same logo, but without the AOPA initials, and this gets about as close as you can to the original without creating any copyright issues. Sunburst metallic dial, so silver sunburst brushed out from the center. We have dished black tone-on-tone registers. This is the Panda dial. You can see they have little concentric patterns internally. Very different from the original here. We have all applied rhodium-plated steel indices rather than printed features, and then a date down at 6 o'clock hiding in the chronograph hours register. We have the circular slide rule, and I may as well demonstrate this. Now, to Breitling's credit, and perhaps lending credence to its claim that it and not AOPA designed the Navitimer, Breitling had originally built the Chronomat in the early 40s with a more limited circular slide rule logarithmic scale calculator, but with the introduction of units and a more complex scale, Breitling boasted that with the Navitimer of the 50s, you now had a flight calculator that did more than the original Chronomat and gave you everything you needed to perform in-flight calculations for things like airspeed, ground speed, drift, rate of climb, rate of descent, fuel consumption. And so you can do that quite easily. It's not a complete slide rule. You know, if you've ever used a normal engineer's slide rule, there are other scales here. This is primarily for multiplication and division. So let's talk about how this works. It works fairly intuitively. Let's say I want to perform division. Well, it works like a fraction, 80 over 40. So what's 80 divided by 40? Well, you go back to the index, which for our purposes is this little green 10 on the inner scale. So 80 divided by 40 is 2. Remember that. You've got to keep your decimal places in mind, because this could also be 80 divided by 4, in which case the answer would be 20. So you got to keep those decimals in mind. Now, in terms of multiplication, it works the other way. So let's say I want to multiply 9 times 3. Easy enough. Okay. So 9 times 3 is 27. We're going to find 3 on the inner scale, and there it is. And sure enough, 26, 27. You can see it's not fully calibrated, but there it is right there. 9 times 3, 27, right above the 30. Okay. Now, the watch is a vertical clutch chronograph, which means when you start it up, there's no jump or stagger to the seconds hand. It always resets perfectly to the index at 12. And if you wish to leave it running, there's no additional wear and tear on a vertical clutch chrono, so you can easily do that. There's a very crisp column wheel function selector, which you can see on the back. The B01 movement was originally launched in 2009 on solid caseback chronomats. It was never envisioned as a display caseback movement, but it actually looks pretty good. It's fairly large, and with the exposed column wheel, it's a lot more physically attractive than most automatic vertical clutch chronos. So by accident, it turned out to be a pretty good display caseback movement. And I can tell you from experience, this is one of the best column wheel feels I've encountered. Now, there is a hacking or stop seconds mode where you can stop everything and set the watch to a reference time. Just make sure we're not in the date change zone here. We were. That's why we always check. And so you can see I also have a quick set for rapidly cycling the date. The watch is 30 meters water resistant, which is fairly standard for pilots' watches. And the movement, let's talk about it. Caliber B01, manufacture 47 joules, automatic winding, 70-hour power reserve, 4 hertz beat rate, column wheel, vertical clutch. It has a 5-position adjustment and a COSC Swiss chronometer certification. You can also see here that the regulation system is a hybrid of Edicron, with the gold key used for timing adjustments and the silver key used for beat error correction. And then there's a very, very small eccentric screw, fine adjustment, that can be used for 24-hour corrections of less than 5 seconds per 24 hours. So that's what that is there for. So you get a lot of value with this watch. If you love it, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.